Independence City Council meeting. It's Tuesday, January 10th, 2023 at 6:30 in the evening. Let the record show that all the councilors are present, and we're going to start this evening off. City Council meeting is
The audio is fine.
The audio works. Am I good to go now? Or do we have to re-listen to me again and again? Okay, we're good? Jason, we good? Okay, thank you. We're going to have the Boy Scouts who are going to help open this evening's session. We're not able to join us today. It's homework. And so we're pleased to have the AMVETS who will present the flag and the Pledge of Allegiance. So I invite the AMVETS to present the flag, and then we'll move forward with our agenda. Gentlemen. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. My job is done. Thank you. Thank you. Want to thank, please be seated. Want to thank the AMVETS for coming and filling in at the end. American Legion, I'm sorry, excuse me. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's welcome. I'm glad everybody's here. We have already done the roll call. Everybody's here. Council members sitting at the dais, you have minutes from the 2 meetings in December, and do they meet with your approval?
Mayor, there's a Scribner's error in the first set of meetings at the end of section 7.5. It's unclear who seconded that motion. Apart from that change, I make a motion to accept as prepared.
Have a motion.
Second.
Second. Karen, you found what you need.
It's at the very bottom of 7.5. You've got an annotation in there that I assume is me, but I'm not sure. You got CSC seconded.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay. So I have a motion to approve as amended.
Second.
I have a second. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. I think the next item is to our city recorder.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oaths of office. So, Mayor McCardle.
Patty, would you join me? Folks know it does take a whole family to do this.
Mr. Mayor, raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, John McCardle, say on oath
I, John McCardle, say on oath
that I will support the Constitution and laws
that I will support the Constitution and laws
of the United States
of the United States,
and the state of Oregon,
state of Oregon,
and the charter and ordinances
and the charter and ordinances
of the city of Independence, Oregon,
of the city of Independence, Oregon,
and that I will perform the duties of the office
and that I will perform the duties of the office
of mayor to the best of my abilities.
of mayor to the best of my abilities.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. Mayor. We have two council members who are joining us again for another round. And so would they like to join me down here, Councilor Core and Councilor Morton? Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Say on oath.
I, Marilyn Morton, say on oath
That I will support the Constitution and laws
that I will support the Constitution and laws
of the United States
of the United States
and the state of Oregon,
and the state of Oregon,
and the charter and ordinances
and the charter and ordinances
of the city of Independence, Oregon.
of the city of Independence, Oregon,
And that I will perform the duties
and that I will perform the duties
of the office of counselor
of the office of counselor
to the best of my abilities.
to the best of my abilities.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. Yeah. Kate Schwarzer. I, Kate Schwarzer, say on oath. I, Kate Schwarzer, say on oath. That I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States and the state of Oregon, and the charter and ordinances of the city of Independence, Oregon. And that I will perform the duties of the office of counselor to the best of my abilities. So help me God.
Kate, you have to come up here now.
Come up here.
Okay, the first thing we have to do, and Tom, don't leave, that we have to elect a council president. And in case I, drop over or something like that, we have historically used the most senior member. Our current council president is Marilyn Morton. Would anybody like to make a nomination for council president?
I'd like to nominate Marilyn Morton for council president.
I have a second.
Second.
Second, discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Counselor.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a recognition of an outgoing counselor, and I'd like to, council members are seeing this proclamation for the first time, and I'm going to ask our city recorder to read this proclamation.
Whereas the city council of the city of Independence from time to time commends various people for outstanding service to the city. And whereas Tom Dacus was appointed to fill a vacancy on the city council in July 2010, elected in November 2010, and re-elected in subsequent elections. And whereas he also served on the Independence Planning Commission from October 2005 until July 2010. And whereas during his term as councilor, he served as council liaison to the Independence Historic Preservation Commission and the Topic Safety Commission, and so several other city committees. Now therefore, we, the city council of the city of Independence, on behalf of city officials, staff, and community, hereby recognize his invaluable years of service to the city and do hereby proclaim sincere thanks and gratitude for his dedication to the same. Done this 10th day of June.
If I could have a motion to approve.
I would like to move to approve this proclamation and make it part of our permanent city records.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Roden. Is there further discussion? I just want to say it has been a pleasure, an honor to serve with Tom for all these years. He's made this community a better place, both with his work here, Planning Commission, working with Boy Scouts, and just being the kind of person that you're proud to know, that you're proud to have seen in action in so many ways. And I so appreciate it. And I'm so honored to be able to hand this proclamation to you. Oh, I have to have you approve this, folks, first. So all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Tom, come on up here, please. We're gonna take about a 10-minute break here. There's goodies, so people can get photos that anybody needs. There's cupcakes and lunch, cookies.
Mom likes cookies.
Tom likes cookies. So we're having cookies. So we're gonna reconvene in about 10 minutes, and then we'll do the business meeting, okay?
And
So we're,
Mr. Mayor, may I point out that for the first time in the history of independence, you have an all-female council. Get ready for a bumpy ride.
let's go get a cookie.
I didn't know it was the first time.
Ever.
Yes, get cookies.
I'm gonna take it, everybody on the side.
We're back in session here. We're going to go to, is there any public comment? Anybody jumping up to make a public comment? See no one rushing the microphone, so we're going to continue moving forward. Ms. Butch, did you want to make the introduction for the report?
Good evening. Today we have our auditor, Jessica Luther Haynes from the firm of Aldrich CPAs and Advisors. And so she'll present the audit and the combined audit, city and.
Great. Good evening and welcome to the Independent City Council. Glad to have you here this evening.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. So as Gloria mentioned, my name is Jessica Luther Haynes. I am a senior manager with Aldridge CPAs and Advisors based out of Salem. And the city went through an RFP process in early 2022 to select new auditors. And throughout the process, they ended up ultimately selecting Aldridge CPAs and Advisors. So glad to be here, and you'll be seeing a little bit more of me over the next several years. So I'm going to start by going over the annual comprehensive financial report, which is the set of city's financial statements. I'm going to just touch on a few of the highlights there, touch on our auditor's reports, and then move on and discuss the Urban Renewal Agency, the letter, the communication that was emailed to you all a few weeks ago. That is the conclusion letter. It's a requirement by auditing standards that we communicate certain things with you at the conclusion of the audit. So we'll touch base on that. And then I'll close by going over the award programs that the city participates in and the awards that they have received in this year. So to begin with, the annual comprehensive financial report, I'm going to begin with the independent auditor's report, which is on page 1 of that large document. If you want to, in the agenda packet, it starts on page 31 of the agenda packet. So this is our independent auditor's report. It summarizes our opinions, essentially. So it discusses in the second paragraph, it says, in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the fund information of the city of Independence as of June 30, 2022. Essentially, it says we give an unmodified opinion on the financial statements at the end of the year, which is the best that you can receive. So congratulations, you have an unmodified opinion. The rest of the auditor's report, it discusses then the basis for our opinions, so what we did to form our opinions. It then discusses the responsibilities of management for the financial statements, our responsibilities for the audit of the financial statements, and then continues on to discuss our responsibilities and opinions on the required supplementary information, and other information. I'm not going to spend significant amounts of time on that because if I spend a significant amount of time on every page of this 200-page document, we're going to be here all night. So in summary, you received an unmodified opinion, which is the best that you can receive. So next I would like to go to the statement of net position, which is on page 14. It is on PDF page 47 of the agenda packet. So the statement of net position, this is essentially the balance sheet of the city. It shows the city's assets, deferred outflows, liabilities, deferred inflows, and the net position. The net position of the organization, if you're running a business, it's essentially your equity. It is the retained earnings. It is what is going to be available to be spent, utilized in future periods. A couple of items to note here. Under assets, the first line item is cash and cash equivalents. You will note that your cash at the end of the year was $12.5 million. At the end of June 30, 2021, your cash was $9.9 million. So you had an increase in cash of $2.6 million. A few other items you'll notice, the city implemented GASB 87, which is a new lease standard. And in that implementation, it requires the city to measure the present value of future lease payments as both lessor and as lessee, and to add those receivables and those liabilities and deferred inflows to the financial statements. So if you're looking at this set of financial statements as compared to the prior year, you will note that now you have a line item for leases receivable under assets, You now have a liability for leases payable under liabilities, and you now have a deferred inflow related to leases receivable under deferred inflow. The city does not engage in significant lease activity, so the impact of this implementation of the standard was minimal to your financial statements at the end of the year. Another item I would like to point out is the net pension liability. This can be found under the non-current liabilities section, and you will see that at the end of the year, the net pension liability is about $4.3 million. At the end of 2021, this liability was $7.5 million. Now, you guys did not make $3.2 million in additional contributions to pay down that liability this year. That liability is measured a year behind the information that's being presented. So these are June 30, 2022 financial statements, and the information being presented in them related to the net pension liability is as of June 30, 2021. Well, a factor of that calculation of net pension liability is the fair market value of investments. I can tell you right now that investments as of June 30, 2021 were probably a little bit higher than they're going to be as of June 30, 2022. So this year you did experience a significant drop in that pension liability. Next year, if I had to guess, that would probably increase again and go back up. So just one of those items that significantly impacted the overall net position of the organization this year. And then we'll move on to the next two pages, which are the statement of activities. There, I just primarily want to point out the change in net position. So this is essentially your net income at the end of the year. So your revenues less your expenses, what was the net of that activity? And for the current year, it was $4.5 million, which is great. Yet again, 3.2 million of that, however, is due to that drop in net pension liability. So if you remove that net pension liability change, you're at about $1.3 million, $2.3 million. I can do math. And so still very healthy, still great for an organization that is your size. Continuing on through the next pages, you will see individual columns for each of the major funds. As auditors, we came in and we gave a separate opinion on each of those separate columns. So if you're looking at the individual or the independent auditor's report, you'll see that we spell out our opinion on those as well, which was also unmodified. I won't go into great detail there, but they are there and it shows the assets, the liabilities, the revenues, and the expenses broken down by individual fund through those statements.
Can you tell me what you mean by not modified? Why would you ever modify as an auditor?
Modify our opinion. The most common is if you did not implement a new standard. So let's say the new lease standard that came into effect this year, if the city had significant leasing activity and chose not to implement that new standard, well, the lease is receivable, the lease is payable would be impacted, and we would not be able to measure what the impact of that would be on the financial statements. And so what would end up happening is we would modify our opinion and say that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with GAAP, with the exception of implementation of this new standard because the city opted not to. That's not the case here, however. So the financial statements, yes, they'll have the fund statements there. You can certainly go and spend additional time looking through those. I'm not going to touch on those really. And then it's going to progress into the notes to the financial statements. And then after that, we'll get to the budgetary comparison schedule, which begin on PDF page 103. The first budgetary comparison schedule that we have is for the general fund. So you will see 4 different columns there. The original budget column, that is what was adopted by the city council back in June of 2021. The final budget column, that is the original budget column, plus or minus any supplemental budgets and appropriation transfers that were made during the current year and approved by council. The actual column, those are the actual numbers. That is the actual activity that happened in the current year. And then the variance column, that is taking the actual amount and determining the variance between that and the final budget amount. So there you'll see total revenues. You had actual revenues of about $100,000 more than was budgeted for the general fund. And you had expenditures that were about $2 million less than budgeted for the general fund. Overall, your net change in fund balance for the general fund was a positive $195,000. So these budgetary comparison schedules are available in the financial statements for all of the funds of the city. So as you are continuing on your progression through the Act for documents, you will see these budgetary comparison schedules being presented for every single fund that the city has. The format will be the same. And then after the budgetary comparison schedules, we get into the statistical section, and that begins on PDF page 155 is where we'll start. So the city prepares an annual comprehensive financial report, and as a part of that, they choose to participate also in the GFOA's Certificate of Achievement in Excellence in Financial Reporting program. As a part of that program participation, they add all of these statistical information schedules. These are for the most part 10-year trend items. So this first one that we're going to look at, this is the net position by component. So we looked at that statement of net position, and that bottom number, that was the net position of the city as a whole. This is taking a closer look at it, and it shows your net position for the primary government as a whole over the last 10 years. So if you look at that unrestricted number and you go to the fiscal year 2014 column, you'll see that you had $3.7 million in positive unrestricted net position in 2014. It was a while ago. But 2015 came along and you'll see that there was quite a significant dip in that unrestricted line item. It is now negative $4.1 million as of 2015. Well, that drop was due to the implementation of GASB 68, which added that net pension liability to your guys' books. So that is what caused that significant dip there. And you will see that it continues to decrease until 2018. And at 2018, it reaches the bottom that it is of negative $12 million. But then it starts trending upward again. And so 2019, it was negative $10 million, 2020, negative 6.7. And now this year we're at a positive $3 million. So to me, that's showing that the city is constantly showing improvements. Your net position that is unrestricted and available for pretty much any use in future years has now a positive number. Next, I'm going to talk about the independent auditor's report that's required by Oregon state regulations. That starts on PDF page 185. So as a part of our financial statement audit, there is a requirement that we also issue an auditor's report required by Oregon state regulations. So this is set forth by the state of Oregon, and it requires, as auditors, we come in, we look at certain compliance items. And it requires that we also look at internal controls. In our financial statement audit, we always look at internal controls anyway, but this also solidifies it by the state of Oregon. So on the first page, you'll see the compliance section. So in the bullet points, it talks about the items that we must test. So in there, the highlights are going to be budgets. Budget's legally required. So did you adopt your budget? Did you follow local budget law when you adopted your budget? And did you comply with the budget requirements in the current year? That's what we're testing there. Another item that is of note is highway revenues used for public highways, roads, and streets. So this is the state gas tax apportionment that you guys receive through the Department of Transportation. All of the cities and counties within the state of Oregon are allocated a certain percentage of that gas tax money. And the Oregon State Constitution dictates what you can spend that money on. Essentially, it has to be spent on streets. The maintenance of street, the expansion of streets, the operations of streets. And then the final larger item that we test is public contracts and purchasing. So ORS 279. So did you go through the proper channels when you went out for competitive bids? Did you get bids and quotes when you did those large purchases this year? Or did you not follow the requirements? Those are kind of the large items that we test. At the bottom of the page, you will see our findings. Essentially, if we don't list it, then you complied. So we did have 3 items that were findings this year. The first one, and they were all related to the budget. The first one is an estimate for general operating contingency was made in a non-operating fund. So you're not allowed to budget an operating contingency item in a non-operating fund. Makes sense, right? So the city did that. They will be correcting that going forward. I don't anticipate this being an issue ever again. The second item there, repayment of interfund loans. The city has historically budgeted those as other financing uses rather than debt service expenditures. They're required under local budget law to be debt service expenditures. So one more item there. And then on the next page at the top, you'll see a few items where the city overexpended funds during the year. So you spent more in the budget categories than you had budgeted. All of these are fairly minimal items. They don't have significant impacts going forward, and I don't anticipate them being issues in future years. The next section discusses internal controls. So this talks about what a significant deficiency is, what a material weakness is, and it would identify if we had identified any of those. We have not identified any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses during the course of our audit. So that is the end of the ACFR, so the city's documents. The Urban Renewal Agency's document follows in the PDF packet. Now, the Urban Renewal Agency is a component unit of the City of Independence. So it is audited as a fund of the city, and it is audited as its own separate entity, and a separate set of financial statements and a separate report is issued on the Urban Renewal Agency. I'm happy to say that an unmodified opinion was given also on the Independence Urban Renewal Agency. Yet again, best you can get. I won't spend significant amount of time on the Urban Renewal Agency because yet again, it's wrapped up in the city. So I would refer you to the city's financial statements for more information on that. And then the next item is going to be the letter that was emailed to you all, I believe at the end of December. And that is our communication with those charged with government minutes at the end of the audit. So this is a requirement under auditing standards. We must prepare and provide you with this letter that essentially says that what we did. We audited the financial statements of the city and the Urban Renewal Agency as of June 30, 2022. It then discusses significant audit matters, talks about significant estimates, talks about journal entries and corrected and uncorrected misstatements, and then other audit findings and issues. You can peruse that. For the most part, there isn't anything that stood out to me in preparing this that I am going to point out to you now, other than items that we've already discussed. So in the first paragraph or second paragraph, it discusses the implementation of GASB 87. We've talked about that. It discusses the net pension liability. We talked about that. So for your perusal. Attached to that are the journal entries that were proposed and accepted by the city during the course of the audit. Now, my understanding is the city is not used to having proposed journal entries, so I wanted to just touch on this for a moment. I have never been in a situation where I've come in as the auditor of a new client and not had a journal entry. So this is not an unusual item. There is no rule book for auditors. There is no standard that says every auditor must look at the exact same transaction in the exact same way. So as an auditor, we come in and we assess risks and we set different materiality levels. And so what I deem risky and the materiality levels that I set are going to be different than any other auditor probably that you meet. So as a result of that, we look at different things, we decide what's material. And as a result of that, we get journal entries where potentially other auditors did not. So in perusing those two that I wanted to point out on the second page, this first one is $8.9 million related to the MyNet debt. This was a simple reclassification. So within the set of financial statements, you can have a transaction presented 3 different ways, which is a lot. And so this particular transaction was on the fund basis only. And what we did was we proposed that that transaction be presented as it was on the budgetary statements, whereas previously it had been presented as it was on the government-wide. So it's just reclassifying it from showing it this way to showing it this way. At the end of the day, it was not a significant item, really not a big deal, other than the dollar amount associated with it. And then the second item I wanted to point out is journal entry number 6. And so that relates to the ARPA funds, the ARPA money that was new to every organization this year. I can tell you that every organization I've worked with this year got this wrong. So this is not an unusual item. It was not unexpected that I would have come in and it would have been recorded incorrectly. I learned late in the season how it should have been recorded as well. So yet again, although it's $700,000, it really was not a very significant item simply because it was new to every organization and every city out there got it wrong. So beyond that, I want to now discuss the award programs. So I know you guys are going to just touch on this a little bit later too. But essentially what happens with this packet is the city will submit it to the Government Finance Officers Association, and they will assign a reviewer. And the reviewer will go in and they will determine if it meets the criteria for participation in the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting program. Now, the city has received that certificate and that award since 2015, I believe, and has received it every single year. So I don't anticipate there being any issues in this year, and hopefully that is the case. And then the city also started in 2021 and was recently awarded the Popular Annual Financial Reporting Award, which essentially takes this 200-page document, summarizes it into a nice, neat little 30-page document that really highlights the important items to the city, to its citizens, and makes it in a more digestible form. So the city was awarded that award as well in the current year, and I believe you'll have a presentation on that item later. Both of these programs are voluntary. The city does not have to participate in them, but to me, it shows that the city is wanting to be excellent. You want to receive that certificate of excellence in financial reporting. You want to provide the users, the citizens of your financial statements and of your financial information with information that they can digest. And so I think it's excellent that you guys are participating in those programs and will continue to do so in future years. So I just want to take a moment now to thank the city finance staff for putting up with all of our questions and comments. Being a first year audit for us, there were probably a lot more than they're used to, but they stuck with us and they gave us everything that we needed, and they were very patient with our million questions. So I appreciate all of your hard work, and thank you all.
Thank you for coming in and presenting to us. I appreciate it. And we have reading, should we
You
get
do,
to?
yeah, light reading if you're sleepy tonight.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any questions or?
I did have a question. I just want to make sure I understand this.
Yes.
In the net pension liability, it went down about 3 million.
Yes.
And that's because of the stock market.
Yes.
So people lost their pension, so it's not a liability to
No.
us. Is that how it works?
So the net pension liability, it's a net number. So what that does is actuaries come into the PERS plan and they measure what the total pension liability is for the plan. They take that number and they subtract out any investments that were set aside in a trust fund to pay those future liabilities to come to a net number. And so if your pension liability is $50 million and your assets are 30 million, your net is 20.
Okay.
So your investments, if they fluctuate and go up in value, then your net pension liability shrinks. If they go down in value, then your net pension liability.
Okay, but you're anticipating it going back up.
I
year.
anticipate the net pension liability increasing.
And what
Yes.
causes it to increase rapidly? Like,
Because the fair market value of investments. So at June 30, 2021, investments were, from my understanding, in my experience, a lot higher than they are currently as of June 30, 2022.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and visit with us.
You are
See you next
welcome.
year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're moving forward to my section. We have council liaison appointments, and I've done a little scribbling here. And so I'm going to ask that Counselor Morton continue on with the museum and with the library. And I'm going to ask that Counselor Roden continue on with the traffic safety. Going to ask that, got to check my list here, making sure I'm doing this, that, hold on, there it is, that Counselor Kaur continue on with the homeless effort, and knowing that there are lots of things going on related to homeless, and the governor made some executive declarations this afternoon that may have some implications on all that. So I'm going to ask that Counselor Kaur continue there. I'm going to ask that Counselor Martin Willis handle historic preservation as well as planning, please. And I'm going to ask that Independence Days, that Counselor Job handle liaisoning. And I want to say, when we're talking about liaisons, that doesn't mean that a council member has to be there physically for every meeting. They just need to know what's going on, and checking in both with staff, and sometimes being there personally when they can, or watching it on video or other times, and then checking in with that. And then Counselor Schwartzler, if you'll handle parks. All righty? Okay. And I have that, Karen, scribbled up, so, because I went through there quickly. Okay, the next thing we have is boards and commission appointments. It's in your packet on page, I can't,
225.
225. I have a collection of reappointments, new appointments, and also you have a new planning commission person in there. And so these are reappointments, and I would appreciate a motion to approve these folks.
Mayor, these have all been
Yeah.
verified and confirmed by the people, right?
Yes.
And they know we're doing this, okay.
Yeah.
I have a question on the Traffic Safety Commission. Has anybody been in contact with this, Mr. Miller, to see if he's interested in reappointment?
As I understand from staff, they did.
I believe so. But I can't, there was at least, I can't believe.
Only reason I ask is because it's been a while since he's been to a meeting, so I was wondering if he was interested.
Right. I only know what staff have told us on that. And
I'm sure it's fine. I was just curious.
this is an action item, please.
I'd like to move to approve the reappointments of the presented candidates.
Second,
Thank you. And I assume that was also for the planning commission person also.
Sure, we can include that.
Thank you. Okay with the seconder?
yes,
Thank you. I have a motion, a second discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next thing we have is to, as part of being with Minnet, we have to both have a citizen representative and a council member to serve on the Minnet board. I'm recommending that we reappoint Michael Hicks, and that from the council, we appoint Kate Schwartzler as our representatives to the Minnet board. And this is an action item.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second,
Motion second, discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Madam City Manager, to you, please.
Global greetings to everyone. Thank you to those of you who came to see us personally, and thank you to those on Zoom. I'd like to summarize how this works for any of our new folks on Zoom. If you haven't joined us before, as you've noticed, the mayor runs the meeting. That's one of the jobs he was elected to do. He announces everything on the agenda. A staff member will normally provide a presentation or a summary of what the issue is. Council will then ask questions of the staff. Once the questions are answered, there may be discussion and a motion will be made, a second to the motion, and further discussion can't be taken at that time, or a vote will be taken. Once the vote is completed, then they move on to the next agenda, and so on and so forth. During this time frame, I like to say what you won't see is what you sometimes see on dramas. You won't see yelling, screaming, grandstanding, or any of the bad things that we see on television. What we have is a wonderful volunteer group of counselors who work very hard at the business of running the city. So I like to, almost every time that we come here, thank my counselors. It's an honor to work with all of you, and welcome, Counselor Schwartz. I look forward to working with you. Tonight's going to be just a little bit different. Normally, we will have a staff presentation. However, we have 2 work sessions tonight, post-council. So I don't want to keep our volunteers too late. Both of those work sessions are joint, one with the Planning Commission, one with the Parks Commission. So we have done away with our staff presentation tonight. We'll go through the council and then down to the work session without that presentation. I'd like to invite any of you who would like to come down to the work session. It is downstairs. It will also be on Zoom. We welcome our community. It's not an interactive meeting, but it's an informational meeting. That's all that I have tonight, Mayor.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Moving promptly forward, I think we have the GNR Auto Records License Renewal. Good evening, Sergeant Hedlund.
Good evening, Mayor, councilors. I am not Sergeant Manuelos, I'm Justin Hedlund. I'm stepping in for him. This is his memo that he submitted. And you should have in your packets. This is for a renewal of license for record for GNR Auto. Are there any questions about the memo itself?
It's very complete. Thank you. Any questions for staff? It's pretty straightforward. We do this every year.
I move to approve the renewal of the annual supplement business certificate for GNR Auto Wreckers.
Second.
I have a motion, second discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's great. Ms. Butch, I think it's to you.
Thank you. So at this time of year, every year, the council appoints a budget officer. I've been doing, standing in as that budget officer for the past 5-8 years, I think. In normal standards, it's either the city manager or the finance director. A few years back, the city manager decided to allow me to do that. I'm honored to be able to do that and be recommended to do that. And you have the budget calendar.
In your packet.
Yes.
Questions for the presenter at this point? This is just part of what we have to do. Okay, there is a motion.
And I move to adopt the 2023-24 budget calendar as presented in our packet and to appoint Gloria Butch, Finance Director, as our budget officer.
I have a motion, a second by Martin Willis. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. We're going to council announcements, and councilors, I messed up there a little bit. I did have a couple of things that I needed to, under mayor, to share with you. So if I can do that at this point, please. I just wanted to keep you informed of a few things. Patty and I were able to, just before the Christmas holiday, we hosted the Mid-Willamette Valley Mayors Coalition at Valkyrie. And a number of people from Polk, Marion, and Yamhill County elected officials came and joined us. Many of them hadn't been to Independence, and they said they loved it. They went and had goodies and eats and drinks in town, and many of them have indicated they're coming back, and I've seen several of them. Had the pleasure of going to the youth art exhibit at the museum. It was interesting. Young people doing good stuff, and it was a real joy to do that. To just remind everybody that U.S. Senator Wyden and our new congressional member, Congresswoman Salinas, will be at Western Oregon University on Saturday at 1 p.m. in the Pacific Room. So if you'd like to meet and visit with our elected officials. Just letting folks know that City Hall Day, the League of Oregon Cities City Hall Day is coming up on January 25th at the Salem Convention Center in the state capitol. I know several people are planning to attend. And also for your calendar, the COG annual dinner, Council of Governments annual dinner, will be taking place in Newburgh on February 15. That's a Wednesday. And that's where the 43 member governments get together and share a report. So a brief report from me. Do other people have other announcements they'd like to make at this time? Councilor Coor.
Question for you, Mayor. Are we gonna get a notification about the dinner and
Yes.
details and everything? Okay.
Yes,
I just wanted to remind everybody, the point in time count, the annual homeless count of unsheltered folks in our community is happening at the end of January. I just wanted to reach out and say thank you to the city for partnering with Polk County to develop a video about the pit count. It's already gotten lots of hits and lots of interest. So thank you very much for Emmanuel's time to do that.
thank you, appreciate it. Other,
Yes.
please.
The Independence Downtown Association has opened its annual Walk of Hearts campaign. And that is the one where you can put your love notes up on a real live red, well, not live, a real red cutout heart, and it will hang for about a month on one of the lamp poles downtown. And they're $30 for one side of a heart, 60 for two. And they will start to go up on the 1st of February. You can purchase your heart between now and January 27th. And that is through the Independence Downtown Association. In your latest city newsletter, it had a link to get to them.
Great. Additional announcements? Hearing none, well, I'm going to adjourn this portion of the meeting. We're going to get together down in the event center in about, I'm going to let, you guys want 10 minutes to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, 10 minutes. We'll get started at 7:35 downstairs for the work session. So we're in adjournment till downstairs. Karen, I have all the paperwork. I'll get to you afterwards. Thank you.
Who wants to take?
work sessions, just for anybody in the audience. This is an information session for the council members and the planning commission, that later on the council and the Parks and Rec board, and everybody's welcome to stay, of course. It's an information exchanging. We're not making decisions. We're learning and getting informed. And I'm seeing this for the first time too. And so is there, Ken, did you want to add anything else? Or are you good?
Good, thank you, Mayor.
Okay. I think it's, who's first?
Go time.
I think it's showtime. Go ahead, Mr. Fisher.
Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gerald Fisher. I'm the Public Works Director for the city. Before you tonight is a presentation on the water management plan and water master plan and water management conservation plan. This is a document that covers the next 20 years of growth in the city and what we need to do in order to provide water to their community, both residential, commercial, and industrial. The plan was put together by West Tech Engineering. They are our contract city engineer, and it has already been submitted to the Oregon Drinking Water and Oregon Health Authority for their review. We're waiting to get a response back from them. I don't anticipate that we'll really get much of anything from them. You never know. So the whole point of this is to give you an introduction to the master plan, because you'll all be seeing it in planning commission first and then city council for ultimate adoption. And any questions that you might have related to the master plan or what we put together, I ask you to hold on to those questions until you can't hear. Louder? Yes. Okay. So hold on to the questions until the very end of the presentation. There's a lot of information to get through, and we have 2 work sessions tonight. So I don't want us to get bogged down in water. We also have hard stuff to do. So with that, Pace and Chris are going to go ahead and do the presentation for us tonight. Okay.
Well, welcome. Thank you. My name is Pace Smith. I'm like Bill said, engineer with West Tech Engineering. And tonight I'm going to go over the water system master plan we've been developing for about a year and talk about the main takeaways in the master plan. As you probably know, the document's about 200 pages long. So if there are any particular things you have questions about, there's a lot more detail provided in the plan, pretty much on all of these things. So the next slide, please. We'll be talking about the purposes of the plan, the study area, planning period, regulatory requirements, existing water system, water demands, water supply, water treatment, distribution, storage, and the capital improvement plan. And overall, the water system is comprised of basically 6, 7, 8, and 9. So those are kind of the main pieces of infrastructure that are involved. If you go to the next slide, please. So the main purposes of the plan are these 5 items here. So the plan will evaluate the needs of the city for the next 20 years. It's going to recommend improvement projects for the existing system. It's also going to serve as kind of a roadmap for development projects to serve development for the next 20 years and prioritize those improvements. The document also is intended to satisfy regulatory requirements, funding agency requirements. Also, it serves as a basis for system development charge and user fee studies. So the study area for the master plan is the UGB. Planning period is from 2025 to 2045. The population projections that are used in the plan are referenced from the Portland State University population forecast or population research center. And the population that they anticipate in 2045 is 18,636. Next slide, please. Regulatory requirements for the master plan and the water system in general are administered by 2 departments, OHA Drinking Water Services Program and the OWRD, Oregon Water Resources Department. So OHA is primarily responsible for enforcing water system master planning for community water systems. They review and approve the plan. They also enforce drinking water quality standards as well as standards for facility construction. Oregon Water Resources Department administers water rights and enforces water use by the city. Yeah. So the city's existing water system is primarily based around groundwater. And so the city has two well fields. These are the Polk well field and the South well field. And each of these well fields has a water treatment plant associated with them. The city also has water rights for the Willamette River in addition to the groundwater wells that the city uses. And so each of these well fields, like I said, has a treatment plant, and these treatment plants are set up only to treat the water source, which is only set up to treat groundwater. And in general, treating groundwater is much less complicated than treating water, for instance, from the Willamette River. We'll get into that a little bit more later. Next slide, please. So the city has 4 storage reservoirs that total roughly 3.5 million gallons. This reservoir, Monmouth Street Reservoir, was constructed in 1976. Some of the other reservoirs were constructed more recently. The distribution system is pressurized by 3 pump stations, and it contains roughly 37 miles of pipe that distributes finished drinking water to all the blocks in the city. So this is a summary of the present water demands in the city. City averages roughly 370 million gallons of water produced every year, and on average, that's about 106 gallons per person per day. The demands that we look at, so this is 3 different rates that we are particularly interested in for the master plan. So this is the average day demand, the maximum day demand, and the peak hour demand. And for water supply projections, we're mostly interested in the maximum day demand. So chapter 5 talks about present water demands as well as future water demands and the water demand projection. This is based on 4 main assumptions, which are: 1, that the per capita demands are not going to increase during the planning period, that no additional water users will be added to the system, for instance, industries that use large amounts of water, and the population projections are not going to be exceeded. And also that water loss in the city is going to stay constant. Water loss is basically the difference between water that's produced at the wells and then what is sold. So there's generally disparity between those two, which we call water loss. So the water supply evaluation looks at what are the city's water sources and how are they going to be able to meet for the city's demands throughout the planning period. And so look at 3 main criterion for evaluating the water supply. The one that is most kind of relevant in the early part of the planning period is called the total capacity criterion. And this looks at basically it's defined as the city's water sources and how they're able to meet the maximum day demand, while also able to replenish water that's drawn down during a major fire flow event. And so had to be able to supply the MDD while also replenishing event within 3 days. And in 2025, the number is roughly 2,000 gallons per minute. By the end of the planning period, that number we estimate is more like 3,000 gallons per minute. The city's existing supply rate during summer months is roughly 2,100. So therefore, basically, we anticipate there to be a deficit starting roughly in 2028 for the city's ability to meet this criterion. And by the end of the planning period, this deficit's estimated to be roughly 825 gallons per minute. So based on this, this finding, we recommend that basically the city needs to start developing additional supply as soon as feasible. And 2028 is obviously, as you probably know, not that far away for developing infrastructure. And so the master plan in chapter 6 recommends to basically maximize the use of the existing 2 well fields, but they can only be developed to a certain extent. And so we have to start looking at a 3rd water source relatively early in the planning period. And that water source needs to have these 5 components, which is water rights, which in the city's case are already existing, they're not in use. And that, and a way to source the water, either with the river intake or a well field, ability to treat the water, store it, and then pressurize it and distribute it to the distribution system. So options for a new water source that make the most sense are these 3, which is the Willamette River, the existing Willamette well field, or a new well field. The first 2 sources are effectively surface water. Well, obviously the Willamette River is surface water, but the second source is a well field that is basically within 50 feet of the Willamette River, and it's been established to be hydraulically connected to the river. So from OHA's point of view, this water would have to be treated like it's the river. The third option is a new well field, but the city does not have groundwater rights to develop a new well field. Ultimately, the plan recommends to develop the Willamette River. This is talked about in depth in chapter 6, but basically this is recommended because the other 2 options are either not a clear path forward, or they're likely to have limited capacity at some point in the near future. And if the city is going to be investing in all of these aspects of the water system, we think it would be prudent to have it serve the city for multiple planning periods, perhaps the next 40 to 80 or even possibly 100 years, basically to meet for the long-term growth of the city's water demand. A new well field was also looked at, and it's recommended that be considered as a possible option, but we don't think that that's actually a strategy that can be implemented with certainty, but it should be considered as if the opportunity were to become available. So based on the water supply evaluation, you're recommending developing the Willamette River. We look at what are the treatment requirements going to be for treating this new source and meeting the future demands of the city. And like I said earlier, the existing water treatment plants are set up for treating groundwater only. They're relatively simple relative to what a surface water treatment plant would require. And they're also relatively far from the river. And essentially a new treatment plant would be required in order to treat the Willamette River. This facility we recommend be planned to be expanded over multiple decades. And ultimately the plan recommends a conventional treatment plant with coagulation, flocculation, sedimentation, and chlorination for disinfection, but also with the components of ozone, carbon filtration, and UV disinfection. So this treatment plant would be able to meet the OHA's regulations of water quality, but it's also intended to address concerns that are above and beyond the minimum standards that users might have with using the Willamette River as a source. So we also evaluate the distribution system for age, material, capacity, and configuration. for this 37 miles of pipe. And so pipes within the distribution system will be 25 to 90 years old by the end of the planning period. We prepare a hydraulic model of the network to evaluate it for deficiencies for its ability to meet fire flows and to maintain pressure. And so when we identify deficiencies, we're also recommending improvements to address those. And those are summarized in 5 different distribution system projects. Those 5 categories of projects address fire flow, replacing lines that are at the end of their service life, improvements to address design standards, pipes that will be able to serve undeveloped portions of UGB, and then also to improve pump stations. This is an example of a map showing the improvement projects for water mains throughout the city, and they're color coded by the 5 categories. So we also evaluate water reservoirs and storage. Main purposes of water storage are to provide drawdown during a firefighting event, provide for emergency use, provide for peak demands to provide a short-term drawdown, and then also drawdown for pump operation. The evaluation finds that we estimate that there'll be a deficit in storage starting in 2035 that'll grow to roughly 1 million gallons by the end of the planning period. The master plan recommends to build a 2 million gallon reservoir as a part of the new water treatment plant. And that is also accounting for a recommendation to decommission the existing Monmouth Reservoir that we expect will require pretty substantial retrofits in order for it to stay in service. So we combine all these recommended projects in a capital improvement plan with 4 different prioritization categories. The first category, priority 1, is near-term high priority projects. Second category is intermediate term projects that will eventually become priority 1. Priority 3 is long-term projects that will potentially be necessary perhaps to serve developments in undeveloped areas. And then category 4 are beneficial projects that are not absolutely necessary. So when we add up the total estimated cost of these projects, that's what's shown in this table here. Basically, roughly half are priority 1 projects, and overall, the main focus should really be on the priority 1 and the priority 2 projects. But priority 3 projects are generally addressed by developers or are optional essentially. So next slide, please. This is a list of priority 1 projects. All the projects are listed in the presentation. We're not going to go into this, but it's just for reference. You can go through the next few slides. Please. So this is just a list of all the projects. The next slide. Next slide, please. But yeah, that's basically that's what we have for you. If there are any questions or comments, we can address that.
I had a question. I didn't read the whole report, I just read the summary, but you're talking about the water rights to the Willamette River. And that only a couple cities right now are drawing water from the Willamette, but several other cities also have water rights to the Willamette. I'm just wondering, in the summertime, if everybody has to start pulling water from the Willamette, how much water is there? And will it be prioritized, or will we get to a point where you can only get 45% of what your rights are because there's such low water level, because so many people are pulling?
That's a great question. In evaluating the water supply, we look a lot at what are kind of the quality of the water rights, and in the water rights and the Water Resources Department, that's called the seniority. And so you talk about a senior water right or a junior water right, and the city's Willamette River water right that was purchased several years ago was essentially a senior water right. And so as a part of the master plan, there's a water resources consultant that looks at the likelihood that these water rights would be called curtailed in a shortage event. And so when we look at that, there's a extremely low likelihood that this particular water right will be curtailed, at least one of them. But the city also has a second water right to the Lambert River that's less senior. It's a larger quantity, but it's not as senior. So that is accounted for in the master plan. And at some point beyond this planning period, it's likely the city will need additional water rights to the Lambert River.
I just wonder, because we see what's happening with Colorado water. And the need for less than your delegation. It's going to be coming for those people.
Council.
Several years ago, we were working on getting some water rights, I believe. They were through Wachang,
It was international paper. We purchased those.
and those are the senior ones.
Those are the senior
Okay.
ones.
Thank you. And also, I was going to ask about the categories of water that you store for, or water use that you store for. This may be not very possible, but would, like the storage of water for fire suppression, could that be some of the thoroughly treated water in the sewer lagoons that's put aside for that kind of thing?
That's not typically done.
All right, just trying to find another source,
Yeah, no,
because that's not drinking water.
I can tell you. We were using both water treatment plant and the wastewater treatment plant for forest firefighting purposes. As long as it's treated effluent, DEQ looks the other way as far as it being used to fight a forest fire. As far as fighting a fire on a house around here, if you have adequate water, DEQ would frown upon it.
Okay.
So.
Councilor Corr, you had a question?
Yeah, you mentioned one of the factors here is going to be the possible addition of a large water user of industrial. Do you have any idea if the stone company coming in here is going to cause any issues?
No, most of theirs is aggregate and cement product that's going to be coming in. The water use, I don't anticipate that being as big. A Coors, a Budweiser,
Yeah.
a Pepsi,
Yeah.
a Coca-Cola, something like that. That would be a significant user and put a strain on the system.
Councilor.
Do we have example of any local cities that use the potential treatment process as described on slide 7?
I would say Wilsonville's plant is very similar to that. And I don't know if they have ozone in Wilsonville. But,
Dallas does though, right?
I'm not that familiar with Dallas.
Okay.
plant. Corvallis Corvallis Taylor water treatment plants, very similar to that as well. Basically, that plant that we're envisioning there is kind of every tool in the toolbox to treat this water. And quite frankly, you don't need every single one of those processes to meet drinking water standards, but we think for planning purposes, you should plan on it. As the design for the facility, as you go through the design process, maybe some of those things will drop out if funding becomes an issue, but for planning purposes, we kind of think it's wise to plan to use every area river treatment plant.
One more
Follow
question.
up, yeah.
So Independence has very, in my opinion, good water. And I think it tastes super good. I've always loved it. Is this going to change the taste of our water by using this process? Does that make sense? Oh, okay.
If anything,
I
you'll
love it.
probably with
Water.
the mixing between your groundwater and your surface water, you'll get a softening.
Okay.
To it.
That might help me.
The Polk well field uses really good water, and so does the South well field. It's not the issue of the quality of the water as much as it is the amount of water that we need. Those wells will not be able to keep up, and you can only poke so many holes in the ground around town where you're competing with ag. And we paid money for a senior water right to the river. The plan is not to basically put an intake out in the river. It's another design. We used to call them raining systems, where you build a case on, you run pipes out, and they pull water from the aggregate that's around by the river. And then you pump that raw water over to the water treatment plant, treat it, and then distribute it into the system. You'll be able to use all of your water right system. I have a question. I know that some policymakers of other communities are having some of the same kind of conversations at one level or another. I know that there have been some policymakers talking about some cooperative efforts with other communities. How might something like that interface with what we're talking about here? So we're planning on providing enough ground and also providing redundancy in the design of the water treatment plant to basically plug and play and add additional water users to it. Monmouth has the same water right to the river. They've shown interest in being a partner, so we can have our plant for what we need and build another one right next to it that we would operate and send them water.
In exchange for payment.
Yeah, it'd be a partnership.
Good.
So
If I may add here.
please do.
Polk County has water rights. So Monmouth, Polk County and Independence, we've all been talking about shared partnership and how that's going to work in the future. So there will be 3 sets of water rights with access to the river. And then down the road, we'll determine exactly how we use that.
Thank you. The master plan only focuses on our city. Please.
You mentioned recommending to continue to explore a new well field as an option, but that's not a strategy. Under what circumstances would you think that would be an option? Is something we just happen upon, or is that something you would actively recommend we actively?
Yeah, so the master plan basically says that pursuing the Lamb River is something that it's a known process that we could recommend, but a well field, like for instance, there might be a piece of property that comes available that has a water right, an agricultural water right perhaps associated with it, that could be developed with wells. And there aren't any known opportunities like that at the moment, but there's, as the community might become aware, or properties might become for sale, there might be opportunity that presents itself for a new well field. And that would be a great opportunity because it requires much less infrastructure to develop potentially.
Follow up, what kind of monitoring would the city need to do to happen across these things?
We recommend actually a formal approach in the master plan, including what we call a groundwater study for availability of water rights like that. And then it also could be just people in the community knowing other people. Perhaps it's farm for sale or another water right that could come available. So yeah, it's basically saying be flexible. If something comes up, jump on it if you can. Commissioner?
I just was wondering if it's a farm, they probably don't have that much water available. Most of the farms in the Willamette Valley don't have thousands of acres that they're irrigating.
Yeah, this for a farm use, a couple hundred gallons might not be adequate, but that could, get several years, of planning period.
This water treatment plant.
It's one MPD.
So one MPD
Roughly
is 700 gallons a minute. So that's not that big, really. And you can find some farmers that have wells that want to, you could find a well that pumps 400 gallons or even 300 gallons. And that's a big addition to the city. So I do think there are farms in this valley that, especially near here, that have wells that have water in that.
Additional questions? Please, sir.
You estimated the population growth to 2035. Now, that's about 7,000 additional people. From 35 to 45, only 2,000 additional. What's your basis for the downtick?
So we use population projections prepared by Population Research Center at Florida State University. And that's, we don't dig into the details. I mean, they're the ones who produce those. Basically, the state has several funding programs that the city can access to assist with funding these projects, and they most of the programs want cities to plan for growth using the numbers that Portland State produces. So we don't, I wish I should have a better answer for you. We don't ask a lot of questions. Those are the numbers that we typically use. If the city has issues with those numbers, it's a discussion with Portland State.
Right. Most cities will typically use those numbers because of that for funding. But also the state has determined that's the standard. A while ago, it wasn't the standard. You could come up with your own projections and it was willy-nilly all over the place. And they said, no, we're not doing this. Portland State population use those numbers, those projections, and so put everybody on the level playing field. So would you like to tell us what the next, how this process moves forward and what the next steps are? So the next steps are, we have a public hearing with the Planning Commission to go over the master plan. And it'll basically be the same thing, but it will be open to the public to ask questions, point out anything that they agree with, disagree with. And at the end of it, the Planning Commission would make a recommendation to the city council to approve the adoption of the master plan. Then we go to the city council, we do the same thing all over again. This is regulated by the state, how we do master plans. We present it again, the public has another opportunity to bring any concerns they have to the city council. And at the end of it, then we would adopt the master plan. The meeting we're having is the meeting in March. And then the city council meeting is tentatively scheduled for the second meeting in March. So if people have additional questions as they sleep on this and think, they can contact your office for any additional questions. Is that okay with everybody? Yeah, reach out to me. Happy to talk about it. Any questions that you got? Great. Thank you. Appreciate the information. And I just would offer that, especially for the Planning Commission members, few years ago when we were looking at water rights, it was very interesting because we had to we got a history of water and independence that back before we were all born, there were the city council at that time started working on water rights, and they got water rights and did the foundational kinds of things that they would never see in their lifetime. And so what we are doing here is some things that some people in here will see the results, and others, it'll be our grandchildren that will see this. But this is the work that we do to invest in the future as those that went before us. So just kind of a little bit of thinking about the future. So thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. And Mr. Irvine, I think you're the next person up. And everybody's welcome to stay. You know, you don't have to.